Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Alex Newman. Alex Newman, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks very much for having me.
Alex, hey, we got to jump right into it. I've seen you, I've heard you talk so much about the progress of America and the decline of America and where you're headed. Give me the background on America and how it was built to become the superpower.
You know, it's actually really simple. A lot of people misunderstand, and they think that it's because we had a lot of natural resources or because the people here were something special. And it's nothing to do with that. The answer for how America became the richest and most prosperous country ever in the history of the world is just the government staying out of stuff. We had a very strong constitution, and basically the constitution said the government can do almost nothing. They can run a post office, they can have a navy, and they can do trade with foreign countries, and that's about it. And this basically allowed free people, to do whatever they wanted. They could start companies, they could work, they could trade, they could invest, they could do anything they wanted without the government getting involved and without the government interfering. And for the first 150 years of our history, we also had a sound money system. Unfortunately, now we deal with a monetary system that is corrupt to the core, that is designed to rob people and to concentrate wealth in fewer and fewer hands. And so we're dealing with that. And then at the same time, we're dealing with all these, they call them free trade agreements. I think that's a terrible name because that's not really what they are. But all these trade agreements are literally hollowing out the economy. They're shipping our jobs overseas. They're shutting down our factories. They're having our state and federal laws overturned in these international tribunals. And so, these free trade agreements, so-called, have been critical in basically hollowing out the American economy, reducing prosperity here. And, now also, of course, we have a government that is completely out of control. They're borrowing more money than they can ever possibly pay back. I think it's technically $18 trillion in debt, but then if you add all the other debt that they're not counting, you're up into the $100 trillion, $200 trillion range. There's no way they can pay that back. So the government is taking resources from the economy and wasting them. They're signing these trade agreements that are destroying our economy. And they've put a money system in place where the money is literally based on debt. It's based on nothing. They print money out of nothing, and it comes out as debt, and then we have to pay interest on it. So we're dealing with all these factors now, and that's why you see the decline of the United States. That's why we went from being the richest and most prosperous country to going on the downhill road that we're going on right now.
Two things I want you to clarify for me. You spoke about your constitution. You had a strong constitution, and this FTAA. What is FTAA?
The FTAA is the Free Trade of the Americas Agreement, and it's essentially what it is it's very similar to what was used in Europe to originally create the European Union. They call it a free trade agreement, and again, I think that's a really bad term because free trade, you don't need thousands of pages of regulations and special favors for mega corporations and big bankers. Free trade is exactly the opposite of that. It's letting free people, me as a free American, I can buy something from a free Bahamian person or a free Mexican person without the government getting involved, without the government regulating and taxing and interfering and blocking and regulating and all these things. So the FTAA, that one never came about. That was the Free Trade of the Americas Agreement, and actually some of the organizations I worked with helped kill that. But the Bush administration was promoting it very heavily, and the mega corporations that were going to benefit from it were promoting it very heavily. But that wasn't the end of the story, and they're still pushing for that. And they also had NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is a very similar thing, only for the North American continent, so Mexico, Canada, and the United States. And, we can see the devastation that this has caused in all three countries. And in the United States, we're losing jobs, we're losing money, we're having these international tribunals overturn our state and federal laws. And the same thing is going on in Mexico. They said everybody was going to be more prosperous with this, and actually just the opposite happened. The mega corporations got more profitable, and they're doing quite well. But as for the workers, as for the people, they're not doing well at all. And they knew this was going to happen, and they were warned that this was going to happen. And now they're just acting like, oh, it was just a big mistake. How did that happen? We didn't realize. But it was by design. And even more troubling, I think, than what it's done to our economy, which is terrible enough on its own, is what it's done to our sovereignty. The United States is supposed to be a free and sovereign country. We're supposed to make decisions for ourselves. We're supposed to have self-government. And we're giving it away with these kinds of trade agreements. They call them trade agreements, but they're much more than that. And, just to give you one illustration of how serious this attack on sovereignty is we now have, under NAFTA, these North American tribunals. You basically have these unelected so-called judges. They shouldn't even be called judges. They're just bureaucrats. And they think they're more powerful than we, the people, making decisions through our state legislatures, through our government. And they literally overturn policies that we passed to benefit, the mega corporations. So they say, oh, well, this law is interfering with, this corporation getting rich off of everybody, or this law is interfering with our efforts to merge the United States and Mexico and Canada, so we need to get rid of it. And that's not how it's supposed to work here. The United States was founded on the idea that the people make the decision. We have self-government here. We govern ourselves. And we've given that away now with these trade agreements. And, the same thing will happen in the Bahamas. Right now, you guys have the ability to control your own institutions. You have the ability to make your own laws. And as soon as people start joining these agreements, you give up that ability to unelected international bodies, whether it be North American tribunals under NAFTA or United Nations tribunals under the World Trade Organization.
It sounds to me as if there's an agenda. Do you know about
absolutely.
This agenda? It's not just a free trade. It's not just to actually for profit. But what is the goal? What is the main purpose of the structure of NAFTA and the WTO?
That's, I think, one of the hugest issues behind all of this. What these, very, very powerful people and institutions are trying to build, they use the term New World Order a lot. It's not very descriptive, but, we can use it because it's their term. You have George Bush going on TV talking about this, and Vice President Joe Biden and Henry Kissinger and all these, extremely powerful people. They say, we're building a New World Order, and they define kind of what the New World Order is. George H.W. Bush in the 90s went on television and said, hey, we're going to have this New World Order. And in this New World Order, the United Nations is going to be strengthened. It's going to have a stronger military, and it's going to realize the vision of its founder. And so when you realize what the vision of its founders was, totalitarian world government, then you see very clearly where this is all going. And these trade agreements are actually crucial to this. What they've done and what they are doing right now is dividing the world up into these regional areas governed by regional bodies. And the European Union, of course, is the furthest example, in terms of how far along it is. And it started exactly the same. They started it with the European Free Trade Agreement, the EFTA. And it wasn't about free trade. And eventually it morphed into what we have today, this European Union, that literally writes 75% of the laws or more that affect the European people. And we can see the effects of that in terms of the economy. Everybody has seen how terrible the European Union economy is doing right now. So many countries are bankrupt. They can't pay back their debt. The jobs are gone. Nobody has jobs. And then you look at, for example, Switzerland, the one country is right in the middle of Europe that did not join this monstrosity, and they're doing fantastically. The two richest countries in Europe, Norway and Switzerland, refused to join this European Union, and we see now that they're the most prosperous countries on the whole European continent. And the reason is very simple. These free trade agreements, they promote them as free trade because, free trade is actually quite a good thing when you're talking about real free trade. But so they promote this as free trade because they know people think, oh, well, free trade, that's good. We'll have more prosperity and so on. But it's really not about that. It's really about undermining the sovereignty of these countries. And in the European Union now, you have these unelected institutions. The European Commission basically is kind of the dictatorship of Europe. Now you have thousands of unelected bureaucrats that write laws for all the people of Europe. And this is happening in every part of the world. If you look in Latin America, for example, in South America, you have UNASUR, the Union of South American States. They're coming up now with their own currency, their own so-called parliament, their own military. You have the same thing going on in Africa. You have the African Union, where they want to build a stronger African Union military and an African currency, and all these types of things. In Southeast Asia, you have the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. In Russia and Eurasia, Putin is building what he calls the Eurasian Union. So they're dividing the world up into all these little regions, and all these regions will be governed by these regional governments. They cannot be controlled by the people, and that's exactly what they've done here in North America with the North American Free Trade Agreement. And all of these regional governments have their loyalty at the United Nations. So the way to create this global system that they want to create, and it's quite literally global totalitarianism, global tyranny, is to first divide the world up into these artificially concocted regions, and then use these regional governments to move toward this world government system that they're trying to get, that they call the New World Order. And, if people look at the motivations of the people behind this, if people look at the histories and the track records of the people behind this, it should be very obvious that they don't have our best interest at heart. They have their best interest at heart. They want to make more money from us. They want to have more power over us. And as long as we have free and sovereign nations, they know that they can't do that. And so that's why there's this giant push in the Bahamas, in the United States, every country around the world. Give up your sovereignty. Join these free trade agreements. Submit yourself to international courts. Give more soldiers to the United Nations military. Give more soldiers to your regional government military. And that's the direction we're moving in very quickly. And if people, all over the world, not just in the Bahamas and in the United States, but if people all over the world don't start waking up, by the time our children are grown up, our grandchildren, it's going to be a very different world, and it's going to be a very unpleasant one.
Can I separate the IMF, the World Bank, and WTO? Are they different?
They serve different functions in the New World Order, but they're absolutely related. The IMF, and I've written on this very extensively, it's a crucial tool for building this New World Order. They've done a number of different functions in the past. One of them is basically bankrupting countries and forcing terrible policies on them and forcing them to submit to these free trade agreements, for example. They'll bankrupt the country, then they'll come in and say, hey, why don't you borrow money from us, and then you can pay us interest for all of eternity. And in exchange for the money that we're loaning you, your government has to do this, that, the other, and give us all your resources and give us all control over your government and so on. And so that was one of the roles they're playing. Now they're being groomed for another role, and this is no secret at all. You won't hear about it in your newspaper, you won't hear about it on your television, but they're very open about this. You can go on the IMF's website and find the documents. You can go on the Chinese government's website and find the documents. You can go on the American government's website and find the documents. They're preparing to turn the IMF into a global central bank. And this global central bank would run the global monetary system, would produce a global currency. They already have the global currency. It's just not quite in use yet as a global currency. It's called the Special Drawing Rights, SDR. And the idea behind these SDRs is basically to turn them into a full-blown global currency. So right now you have the U.S. dollar that kind of serves as the global reserve currency. But as we mentioned at the beginning of the program, they're right now in the process of destroying America. They're in the process of destroying the U.S. dollar. And once that happens, there's going to be some radical restructuring of the global economy and the global monetary system, and we're going to move, at least if these people get their way, toward a global monetary system run by the IMF, where it's basically the same kind of system. They create money out of nothing. They charge interest on that money. And the simplest way to put it is just a big, giant scam. I mean, the system is designed to bankrupt people for the benefit of the government and the special interests and the ultra-powerful, the super wealthy. I don't mean, the rich guy down the street or, the multimillionaire even. We're talking about super billionaires, even trillionaires that are behind this system. And that is quite literally what the IMF is being prepared for. The IMF talks about this. They say we need a new mandate. We're going to run this global currency. The Chinese government, the communist Chinese dictatorship that, is absolutely atrocious in terms of how it treats its citizens. They're saying we need this global government. Let's get rid of the dollar. Let's have a global currency run by the IMF. Russia is saying the same thing, and even our leaders, our Treasury Secretary before the one we have now, his name was Timothy Geithner, appointed by President Obama. They asked him at a Council on Foreign Relations conference, that's a whole other can of worms, but they said, what do you think of this Chinese proposal to replace the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency with the global currency run by the IMF, this Chinese proposal? And Timothy Geithner said, we're actually quite open to that. That's we're open to that idea. So all over the world, the highest levels of power, I call them criminals sometimes, but they're even worse than that. They're plotting to surrender our lives, surrender our liberties, surrender our monetary system to this unaccountable global system that will exist to rip you off and oppress you, to just put it bluntly.
I want you to hear something that our leaders here are talking about. When you hear them talk about the IMF, I want you to hear something from the financial controller. I want you to listen to this.
Country's membership into the World Trade Organization is not too far away, and the Bahamas is being complimented by the U.S. Embassy Charge d'Affaires John Dinkelman for its efforts. Speaking at the opening of an inquiry training conference, the U.S. envoy said trade liberalization provides the framework for advancement for current and future developments in the Bahamas.
Let me stop it right there before we go any further. Did you hear anything you want to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same propaganda line that they use exactly all over the world. Oh, to have development, you need to surrender your sovereignty and surrender your freedom to these international organizations. So it sounds exactly the same as the propaganda they give to every population in the world.
Okay, let me play some more of it.
WTO members praise the Bahamas for the considerable progress it has made in undertaking reforms to bring it in line with the WTO agreements.
You hear anything else you want to comment on?
No, keep going. Of course, WTO members praise this, but
can you imagine the WTO member praising this, and we act as a government, as a people, that we can't get information and see what the WTO has done to other countries?
The participation of this technical training demonstrates the government of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas' strong commitment to putting that necessary regulatory infrastructure in place to become a member.
Minister of Financial Services Ryan Pinder says the government has an aggressive plan in place to ensure that the Bahamas becomes a WTO member sooner rather than later. He notes the progress leading to this elevation.
What I want you to hear is it sounds like it's a plus for us, that we will benefit. And listen, it sounds like he's a part of the plot. It sounds as if like this government is bought out. I want you to tell it clean. I want you to tell us straight up, where are we headed after this, Alex?
You heard me speak about the Standards Bureau today. That requires certain legislation and infrastructure building to undertake. Some intellectual property legislation and amendments that we have to undertake with respect to copyright and trademark initiatives. Those are important. We're bringing into force the Customs Management Act, which is a key component to what we have to do from a customs management point of view to be WTO compliant. And we're looking to modernize our Tariff Act and to bring it up to modern standards with respect to imported tariffs and how we classify those. So it's a pretty aggressive legislative agenda. We're working in conjunction with our interagency approach. Those that have to deal with finance, we work with the Ministry of Finance and Attorney General's office. Those with agriculture, we work with the Ministry of Agriculture and the Attorney General's office. So it's a very cooperative approach, so everybody is on the same page.
The minister added that the Bahamas stands to benefit tremendously as a member of the World Trade Organization.
Within WTO and within the trade initiative, there's a lot of technical assistance, even financial assistance programs and neighboring country programs that help to alleviate the direct costs on Bahamians to those types of initiatives. We have a very aggressive, I spoke about it today, a very aggressive program of seeking technical assistance and other assistance to help modernize our different elements of our economies to be able to be in a position to exceed and be in a position to protect our local producers. So it's not all on our backs individually. There are a lot of initiatives and technical assistance programs that we will be a part of to help build that infrastructure.
Pinder hopes for the Bahamas to become a part of the WTO by 2014.
Alex, let me first tell you, you don't know what it does to me to know what's coming. And for people, our leaders, to be speaking in that tone of voice and with that arrogance that is as if we don't know, or we're so unintelligent that we don't know what's happening around the world. He's bragging on the WTO.
Yeah, and you know what I thought was especially interesting about his comments there is he's just telling the people to their face the WTO is requiring us to do things. That
right.
goes back to the point I was trying to make before. When you join these types of things, you lose your self-government. And, I mean, self-government is crucial, for everything. I mean, if you don't have self-government, you're ruled by people who you don't control. And, I mean, that's the very essence of dictatorship. If you can't control the people who are governing you, you're in a situation where you are a serf. And he's very open about this in these comments. He says that WTO requires us to do this. We have to do this to meet WTO criteria and all this stuff. And, I mean, do the Bahamian people really want to have the decisions that impact their lives made by, bureaucrats from other countries that they have no influence over, that they can't elect or fire? It's just insane. And they put a smiley face on it. They say, we're going to have, prosperity and this kind of stuff. That's baloney. You can look at any country where these bureaucrats have come into, and what you see time and time again, they ruin the economy, they ruin the government, And what they're doing is, they're harmonizing the world regulatory system. And he kind of spoke to that. He said we have to adopt these regulations to be in compliance with the WTO. And that's exactly what's going on. They're harmonizing the regulations all over the world, and we're going to end up in this totalitarian world system where people have no influence over the legislation and the regulation that governs their lives. And it sounds like the ministers in the Bahamas are all in favor of that. So, if I was a Bahamian voter, I would be extremely concerned.
Okay, listen, we got to take our first break. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Alex Newman. Pick up the phone. Tell your friends, Solution Radio, we are on. Welcome back to Solution Radio. This is KC, the Seed Planter, right here in Freeport, Grand Bahama. We got Mr. Newman, Mr. Alex Newman, on the phone. He's a phone guest today, and we were talking about WTO. We talked about NAFTA. What we want to talk to, you still there, Alex?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah.
We want to talk to some more. We want to go in depth now about the Constitution. I was telling my listening audience for a while now about the size of the Constitution and the agreements that are signed under this WTO. Now, we're going to stay in the Caribbean. I want to go to Jamaica. I want you to explain to the people, under the Constitution, what has the Constitution of the WTO done to Jamaica and what it will do to the Bahamas.
It's done the same thing in virtually every country that it's gone, and you can look at the United States as well. We have a constitution that gives the government a few very limited and very defined powers, and it says specifically in the Constitution, if this Constitution doesn't give the power to the federal government to do something, they have no power to do it and may not do it. But by signing on to all these international agreements in the United States and in Jamaica and in every other country, what they do is they drastically expand the power of government to do all kinds of things that they should not be doing. And most of those things involve, contributing to the looting of the public, to bringing down, protections and free market things that exist. And, we've seen that in the United States very extensively. Like I said at the beginning of the program, our federal government is allowed to do very few things, but by signing up to all these international agreements, they keep expanding and expanding and expanding their power. And it is not for the benefit of the citizens. As I mentioned, it's been destroying our economy. And, essentially the system that they're creating here looks a lot like serfdom of before the medieval times in Europe, where you basically had one boss guy at the top and he appointed some lower level guys, and then everybody else kind of just works for them and has no freedom and has no private property ownership or anything. And that's the system that they're moving toward very quickly. We see it being built all over the world. You can look at any country that has joined the WTO and these free trade agreements, and you see that the people are being reduced to serfdom status. And the rulers are getting more and more power and more and more power and more money for their buddies that own, all the big corporations. And it's not that I'm against corporations per se. Corporations have a role. Business is a good thing. Business provides jobs. Business provides goods and services. But the difference between, a legitimate business, it's something that provides goods and services that people want to buy voluntarily, and these mega corporations that are literally, driving this process and looting the public, is that these corporations join with the government and exploit the people, as opposed to producing things that people want and selling them to people who want to buy it. These corporations use the power of the government to loot the public's resources, to loot the workers, and you end up with a system where all of the wealth is concentrated at the tippy top, and everybody else has nothing. And that's the situation that almost the whole world is in today. People are in unimaginable amounts of debt. Even in rich countries like the United States, people don't own their houses. They owe the banks, 90% of the money on their houses. The businesses are in debt. The government is in debt. Where is all this money going? Who is all this debt owed to? That's what people need to ask themselves here. They're creating a scam economy. They're pretending like this is free market policies and stuff because they know that that's what people like, because that works. That makes sense. But when you look at what they're actually doing, it's almost the opposite of that.
Talk about the free movement of people and labor.
Yeah, that's something that's been going on in Europe for quite some time now, and a little bit of migration is not a big deal. But what's going on here is essentially the end of nationhood. We saw this in Europe. They're literally trying to smash thousands cultures that are thousands of years old, and they're trying to merge them all into this bizarre regional type culture. They call it Europe now, and the European Union, and we're all Europeans. And that's not the case. Bahamians are Bahamians. Dutch people are Dutch people. French people are French people. And but they want to end that notion. They don't want people loyal to their own countries anymore. They want people loyal to this kind of global system. And that's what the free movement of people is designed to encourage. And we're seeing it here in the United States on a humongous scale. And our leaders are complicit in all of this. They're encouraging mass immigration from Mexico. And they're encouraging it through welfare, so they give them, free government health care, free government schooling, free government, all this kind of stuff. They leave the borders wide open, and now they're talking about legalizing all these illegal immigrants. And the real goal is to erode the concept of nationhood. So they don't want, in this new world order, they don't want Bahamians, they don't want Americans or Mexicans or French. They want, citizens, global citizens, they call it a lot. And they use a lot of this language like green. We want to be green global citizens. But really, all these terms are very carefully designed. I mean, they hire teams that do studies. What kind of words do we need to use to convince the population that this is a good idea, or at least convince enough of the population that this is a good idea that we can get away with it without the citizens coming to Parliament with pitchforks and torches. So they're very methodical in the language that they use. But you just need to look at the results. The Bible says, by their fruits ye shall know them. So look at the fruits. What are the effects of these kinds of things? You can look at any country that's been involved in these kind of things, including the United States. The United States might even be the best example, because it fell from literally after World War II, the United States had about 3% of the world population and about 50% of the global economy. The United States economy was unimaginably huge, unimaginably prosperous. Today, we're on the road down so quickly. I mean, Americans haven't even realized what's going on here. Our economy has been hollowed out. Our jobs have been shipped overseas to, slave labor in China. And it's the same thing that's going to happen to the Bahamas if the government continues going down this road. It's the same thing that's going to happen in every place. And if you look at the few countries that have withstood this kind of stuff, you see the amazing prosperity they have. I always point to Switzerland. It's such a good example. It's a tiny country. They have 8 million people. I guess not tiny compared to the Bahamas, but, relative to the United States, it's a tiny country. They have 8 million people. They never joined any of these things. They didn't even join the UN until, I think, the mid-2000s or something. So they don't participate in all these regional agreements and regional governments. They maintain their sovereignty. And they're some of the most prosperous people on earth. The average income over there is in the neighborhood of $80,000 to $100,000 a year. In the United States, by comparison, it's about $35,000 a year. So the Swiss are infinitely more prosperous than the other people in Europe who are in the European Union. They're way more prosperous than the American people whose jobs and economy are being destroyed by these international organizations and so-called free trade agreements. And, that's what they don't want to talk about. How can, they tell us, if you want to be prosperous, if you want to compete in the global economy, you have to surrender all your self-government and all your freedom to these international organizations, and then you'll do fine. But that's not true. We can see that from the objective evidence. Switzerland is doing quite well. All the countries that have resisted these types of things, that have maintained their sovereignty, are doing quite well. And the countries that have surrendered are on the way down.
Alex, if you look at the proximity of the Bahamas to the Americas, how does China fit into all of this makeup?
That is actually such a huge point, and I think maybe 1 in 1,000 people might understand what's going on here. I just wrote a big article about it recently. I could start with the history. First of all, the Chinese communists, they came into power with the help of these elite interests that I was talking about before, this establishment. The United States government betrayed the nationalist Chinese, put an arms embargo on them, and allowed the Chinese communists to come to power. Chairman Mao, probably the most ruthless mass murderer in all of history. He killed something like 60 million to 100 million people. There's been no other person in all of human history that has killed that many people. So the United States and these Western establishment interests helped put him in power, and now they're helping the Chinese government to rise. And, actually the Chinese model is something very similar along the lines of what they want for the entire world. You have a small, tiny little group in China's Communist Party that runs everything. You have no freedom. You have no religious freedom. You have no economic freedom. You have no freedom of any sort, no freedom of speech. And the Chinese model, and if you listen to these globalists, these people who want this, what they call the New World Order, they're telling us that they want China to lead the New World Order. So what they've done here, using currency manipulations is one of the key tools they've used. Shipping all the World Trade Organization was also crucial to this. When China joined, Henry Kissinger, our homegrown globalist here, he opened up trade with China, and the purpose was to build up the Chinese economy, to build up the Chinese military to the point where they could lead what this thing that they call the New World Order. I wrote a big article about this last week. If people are interested in learning the details, they can see how far along this process already is. It's called With Western Help, Communist Chinese Building New World Order. And, this didn't happen by accident. This didn't happen because communism worked. This happened because it was deliberate. It was by design. And the reason they want China to do this, and you can see this everywhere in the world. They're doing it in Latin America. They're doing it in Africa. They'll come in, they'll build a few little crummy houses, or they'll build a road or
stadiums.
They'll say, in exchange, we get control of all your resources. All your oil belongs to us. All your trees belong to us. All whatever it is, and that's how they're seizing control of the world. And there's a very deliberate plan. It isn't by accident. And some of the Western leaders pretend like, oh, this is shocking. How is this happening? That China is becoming a superpower and America is going down. It was all by design. The World Trade Organization was crucial to it. The IMF was crucial to it. The U.S. government was crucial to it. And, anybody who wants to see what this New World Order is going to look like ought to take a look at China. It's probably one of the most oppressive governments on earth. Allies with the communist Chinese, or the communist North Koreans and the communist Cubans. And, if you talk about resources, yes, these elite, this establishment plans to control all the resources. But, countries can be very prosperous without having resources. The key to prosperity is really freedom. If people have freedom, they will be prosperous. And I can point to Switzerland again. Switzerland has virtually no natural resources. They're up in the mountains. They have, some trees and some cow fields. But still, they're some of the richest people in the world. How did they get that way? Well, they got that way by having a very limited government, a government that doesn't interfere in the economy, and by allowing people to be free and build companies and have low taxes and, no restrictions on how people do their economic dealing. And, that's what they don't want. That's why the minister that you had on before that we were listening to the quote from, he said, we have to do all these things. We have to change our regulations for the WTO. Well, yeah, you do, because if you're going to be part of this tyrannical global system, you have to have the rules and regulations and legislation that they want. And, again, we can look anywhere in the world and see the effects of this. It's just been an absolute disaster for the common people, and it has been a boon for the people who are running things at the top of the pyramid.
So, Kissinger had a lot to do with this also. Tell me a little bit about Kissinger.
Absolutely. Kissinger has been really one of the key architects of the New World Order. He uses the term New World Order all the time. Anybody who goes on YouTube and types in, Henry Kissinger New World Order can see that he's constantly blabbering about his New World Order. He just put out a book called World Order, actually, and in his book, it's fascinating how he explains what's going on. He says, first we got to divide the world up into these regions, like the European Union and the North American Union and the Asian Union, the Eurasian Union, the African Union, the South American Union. So first we divide the world up into these little regional governments where the people have no control over how their system is run, no control over who is their leaders and so on. And then from there, we move toward a global government. And if we can't do it right away, then we set up, competitions between the regional governments. So we'll pretend like we might have a war here, or maybe we'll even have a real war, because it'll drive people more toward a world government. So Henry Kissinger has been key to this. He was our Secretary of State, our National Security Advisor. And if people look at his history, they would be shocked. When he was Secretary of State, for example, he put out a policy memorandum talking about the supposed United States policy to depopulate the world. He wanted especially to target third world countries. He wanted to promote, depopulation. He wanted less human beings, and that's another common theme that you find through all of these New World Order promoters. They want less people. They want to reduce the population, especially the population in third world countries. And we've seen that time and time again. We see it across Africa. We see it across Latin America. The United Nations is involved. So Henry Kissinger is an absolutely crucial player in this. And if people want to get an understanding of how it's working, how it has worked, and how it's going to work, Henry Kissinger is, oftentimes pretty honest about how it works. You have to read through kind of his bland language, but he gives you a very clear picture of where all this is going. No more national governments, no more nations. We're moving toward this, what he calls a new world order, and he wants China to be put in charge, just like George Soros, just like David Rockefeller, just like all of these extremely wealthy elites that are building this global system.
Before as we wind down, and we got 5 more minutes, listen, I want you to talk about this new currency, because, over here in the Bahamas, we don't even accept American $100 bills because of whatever reason, probably counterfeiting. But because of this counterfeiting ring, they've developed something called a Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. How far off are we from cryptocurrency?
That's interesting. The ultimate goal of these people, and they say so themselves, is to get rid of cash transactions. So once we move toward this global monetary system that they want to build under the IMF with the global currency called the SDR, eventually they want to move toward a system where there's no cash. And so all transactions would be, first of all, monitored, right? And there would be a record of them. So the government would know what everybody was spending money on, what everybody was buying, what everybody was selling. And ultimately, the potential for totalitarianism in such a system is so huge. I mean, just imagine you could never buy anything without your masters knowing about it. You could not participate in the economy if you weren't part of their system. And there's a lot of countries that are already very close to this. Some of the Scandinavian countries, for example, Sweden, I think, is the furthest along of any country where I've spent a lot of time, maybe 5 years or so. There's virtually no cash there anymore. There's still, a little bit for the old people that still hang on and, won't give up. But everything is moving toward, cards, and eventually they want to take it the next step further. There's already plans for this. It's already being done in some places using microchips under the skin. And so you'll take your microchip in your hand or wherever it's located, and you'll pay using your microchip. Now, what happens if you upset your rulers? What happens if
shut it down?
Exactly. They shut you down. You can't participate in the economy anymore. So it's a system of total control where people have no freedom. They do exactly as they're told by their masters, and their masters literally run the world. That's the system that we're moving toward. And, the WTO, the United Nations, the IMF, the World Bank, these are all a crucial part of this system that we're moving toward.
2 minutes. Give us some advice.
If I was Bahamian, I would be at the parliament right now saying, hey, guys, we elected you to govern. We didn't elect you to give away our self-government to international organizations. So, I think people need to get busy, because if the Bahamian people are going to be free and independent, they need to avoid these kinds of, fake free trade agreements and World Trade Organization, these types of things, because once your sovereignty is gone, you're not going to get it back. Once your decisions over your life and your business are being made, in Geneva or in Beijing or in Washington, D.C., there's really no going back from that. You're not going to get your sovereignty back. You're not going to get your ability to govern yourselves back. And, it's crucial that these people be opposed. The system they want to build is nightmarish and totalitarian. And, I hope the Bahamian people and the American people and the people all over the world will join together and say, no, we're not participating in that system. And anybody who tries to sell out our sovereignty and sell out their citizens is going to be fired and maybe even penalized. Because, at this point we're talking about really, really serious implications, and people need to get busy, get educated, get organized, and put a stop to it.
Thank you so much. Alex, we got to do this again, man.
Anytime. Let me know.
All right. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Alex Newman. Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been another production of Solution Radio. I want to thank my sponsors once again. Hey, I need some more sponsors so we can go a little further. I got a text just now. I need to bring this Alex Newman person on. But guess what? It takes money to do these things. These are information that is vital to our future. Hey, this is my new clothing, man. I hope you like it.
You don't have the guts to be what you want to be. You need people like me. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. So, what I make you? Good? You're not good. You just know how to hide, how to lie. Me, I don't have that part. Me, I always tell the truth. So say good night to the bad guy. Go on. The last time you're going to see a bad guy like this again, let me tell you. You need people like me so you can point your fingers and say, that's the bad guy. Well, then maybe